My name is Maya Webb. My family called me the careful one, the one who read everything twice, the one who asked too many questions. They said it the way people say things that are true, but meant as criticism. My father had land in Georgia, 4 acres, a house my grandfather built by hand, before anyone in our family had anything else to show for themselves. My father talked about that land like it was breathing, like it had a pulse, like it was the proof that we came from something real. He made us a promise at every dinner, every holiday, every time someone passed the sweet potatoes, and he felt like being serious. He looked at all 3 of us, me, my brother Derek, and my sister Renee, and he said, "That land stays in the family." We all said yes. The way you say yes to things that feel too far away to matter yet. My father died in March 3 years ago, and the grief was the kind that doesn't move. So I didn't move either. I let Derek handle the paperwork. He had the power of attorney. He said he'd take care of everything, and I believed him, because that's what grief does to you sometimes. It makes you trust people you haven't finished knowing yet. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you forgot to verify? Not because you were careless, but because loving someone felt like the same thing as knowing them. That's where I was. 4 months after the funeral, I got a letter. Property tax statement. Different names listed. Not Webb. A name I'd never seen before. I thought it was a clerical error. I called the county assessor's office. The woman who answered pulled up the record, and she started reading it back to me slowly, like she could hear something shifting on my end of the phone. The deed had been transferred, not after my father died, 2 years ago, and there were 2 signatures on the document, my father's and mine. I hadn't signed anything. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a piece of paper, and the floor felt like it tilted under me. Derek had my signature on a legal document, a signature I never wrote. He had 2 years to plan it. 2 years while my father was alive. 2 years while I was driving down for the holidays, sitting at the same table, watching Derek pour my father's coffee like a devoted son. That's the part that took the longest to process. Not the land, the dinners, the way he looked at me, across the table, already knowing what he'd done. I didn't call Derek. I know that surprises some people, but here's what I've learned about someone who does something like this. They're waiting for you to call. They've already built the story. They know every question you'll ask, because they wrote the answers before you knew there was a question. So I didn't give him the chance to rehearse it with me. I went quiet, I went calm, and I went to work. Think about that for a second. The most powerful thing you can do after someone betrays you is to become completely still. Not because you're weak, because you're choosing when to move. I found an attorney named Patricia Green. She wasn't flashy. She didn't make promises she'd have to walk back later. She was precise, the way a scalpel is precise. She pulled every document, every filing, every date, and what she found was a trail that Derek hadn't thought to clean up completely. Because people who believe they've won stop being careful the moment they think they're safe. He left things behind. He always did. I also called my Uncle Curtis, my father's oldest brother. Curtis had always been at the edges of our family, present, quiet, watching. When I was 16, Curtis told me once that Derek had a habit of helping himself to things that weren't offered. He said it gently, the way you say something you hope will never become necessary. It became necessary. Curtis remembered a conversation, an argument he'd overheard between Derek and my father about 6 months before the transfer. My father said no, Derek saying he'd handle it. Curtis hadn't understood what he was witnessing at the time. He understood now, and he was ready to say so. Do you know what happens to people like Derek? When they realize the person they underestimated is no longer looking away, they don't fall apart. They reach out. Casual testing. Derek called me on a Tuesday evening, asked if I'd gotten any mail about the property. Said he'd been meaning to check in, like he was a concerned brother, like he was thoughtful. I told him I'd gotten a few things, and then I let the silence sit between us. He filled it. He always filled silences. He started explaining the transfer. Said Dad had wanted it done quietly. Said my signature had been there from a Christmas visit. Some papers I'd signed. Did I not remember? I said, I've been talking to an attorney, Derek. He went quiet. Not the calm kind, the caught kind. Meanwhile, Renee had started asking her own questions. Derek had kept her in a different lane, given her a small inheritance check, just enough to feel included, not enough to feel like she needed to look closer. But Renee wasn't unintelligent. She was trusting. Those aren't the same thing. When I showed her the documents, when she saw the dates, something shifted in her face. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "He told me you'd already agreed to sign it over." That's what he'd told her. He told me Dad had asked. He told Renee I'd agreed. A different story for every person, so none of us would ever compare notes. That's the architecture of someone like Derek. Not one big lie, 100 small ones, each built for a different audience. Patricia filed the challenge. Document fraud. Forgery. The county opened an investigation. Derek hired his own attorney, and for a brief window, I think he believed he might still win. He had an answer for everything. He always did. But answers aren't evidence. And the handwriting analysis wasn't kind to him. The examiner's report came back 4 pages long. The signature on that deed didn't match mine, not in the slant, not in the pressure, not in a single distinguishing mark. The transfer was voided. The property came back into the estate. Derek didn't go to prison. I'll be honest with you about that. The legal system moves slowly, and families make everything more complicated. He settled, repaid costs, relinquished any future claim, and signed an agreement that would follow his name in every public record going forward. Quiet consequences. Permanent ones. The kind that don't make noise, but never fully disappear. Renee came to my house 2 weeks after the settlement. She brought food, the way women in our family do. When they don't know what else to bring, she sat at my kitchen table and said, "I should be asked more questions." I told her. He made it easy not to. That's what people like Derek are good at. They don't force you to look away. They just make looking away feel like the peaceful choice. Renee and I are closer now than we've ever been. Uncle Curtis gave his statement without hesitation, stood in front of a notary, and said what he'd seen. He told me afterward. He'd been waiting a long time to be useful. Derek still exists somewhere. I assume he's fine. I just don't spend time on it. That's the part that surprised me most. How little space he takes up now. He was so large for so long, and then, quietly, he became small. Not because I destroyed him, because I stopped letting him define the size of the room. The land is still in the family. My father's name is still attached to it. That's what he wanted. That's what he got. Just not through the person he handed the pen to. If you're carrying something like this right now, if there's a Derek in your family, someone who smiled at dinner and moved pieces when you weren't looking, I need you to hear something. You don't have to be loud to win. You don't have to burn a single thing down. You just have to be patient enough to let the truth do what it always does, which is the surface, every time, without being asked. Have you ever watched someone underestimate you and felt the exact moment they realized they were wrong? Hold that feeling. That's the whole story. If someone in your life needs to hear this, send it to them without a word of explanation. They'll know exactly why you sent it. And if you're still in the middle of your own version, come back. There's more coming. Because the careful ones, the quiet ones, the ones everybody had an explanation for, we always have more to say. She just made sure her name was on what was hers.